Thank you so much. Good morning. I am so excited to be here. Thank you to all of you and to Creative Mornings for having me. I'm visiting from nearby Nashville. Any Nashvillians here? All right, a couple, nice. And I've had the opportunity to be a part of the Creative Mornings community there, and so I am thrilled to be here, so thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about transparency, and we like to add on this little concept of radical transparency, which is kind of the way we do things. It's one of our core values. We're going to talk a lot about kind of the difference between radical transparency and regular old transparency, but this is a concept that is very, very close to my heart. It's been a fundamental part of what it's been like to be a team member at Buffer, and it was a value that I held before I joined the team, but after participating in this culture, it's become even more a part of my day-to-day. So those two things can kind of exist apart, so transparency at work or transparency, in your as part of your own personal values. But in my personal experience, it's really powerful when those two things are combined, but they both work, so we're going to talk about all of that. So I don't need to go too much into this. First of all, Ben's fantastic intro, and secondly, a lot of you have already come up to me and said, I've been following Buffer, I'm a customer, I'm a user, so thank you to you all. If you don't know what Buffer is, our mission is to give individuals and businesses a greater voice on social media and to build a workplace of the future. And why transparency is a good one, because one of our core values is to default to transparency. And what that means is that you're not just transparent when it's convenient, you're not just transparent when you remember to do it, it's default. So unless there's a really compelling reason why you shouldn't be transparent, either within the team or with the public about something, and there are a few of those reasons, but for the most part, if there isn't one, we encourage you to default to transparency. And originally, this sort of started as a very kind of small piece of the culture. So when Joel and Leo founded the company, 6 years ago now, they realized that there were a lot of questions that they had that they weren't able to find answers for. And this was a little bit before the content revolution really took off. So they would have a question like, how much should we pay a freelance developer in Cape Town? Or how do you calculate monthly recurring revenue? Or these questions that startups have. And there was some really great advisors and some people with really great experience who helped us out, but they didn't really have the experience of Googling it and being able to find really helpful data and background and history of how you make these decisions and some examples. So they kind of said, well, all right, maybe there'll be some companies someday who have a very similar question that we had. Maybe they're in a very similar situation. So we'll just publish these things when we figure them out. Probably won't be any central part of our culture or anything like that someday. It's just, maybe we'll be one data point for a company that comes after us. And of course, this turned into kind of a central piece of who we were, both internally and with the public. So transparency as a business is what we're the most famous for. And I can't really talk about transparency without giving a nod to some of the really amazing benefits that have come as a result of this. So really quickly, I'm going to just give some quick examples. So one of them is obviously transparency breeds incredible trust. And this is kind of true across the board, but it's especially true with customers. And so we've had the experience where the more open and honest we've been with customers, the richer that relationship has been. So for example, we have transparent pricing. So we did a deep dive into exactly where every single dollar goes. And we said okay, it looks like of your $10 payment, if you're on the paid plan at Buffer, of your $10, 92 cents goes to culture, so much goes to salaries, this goes to hosting. And you as a customer can evaluate that and decide if you want to support those decisions that we made and if you want to support the company based on that breakdown. So that's a cool example of a way that we've decided to just be really open with customers, and we thought that there was a chance that people might, have a lot of opinions about the way we were doing things, and it turns out people are just really kind and wonderful when you share decisions that you've made. So in 2013, we had a situation where we got hacked. I don't know, any customers from 2013? Anybody around? No, okay, good. None of you know that story. So we've made a lot of security improvements since then. But we got hacked, and we were very, very open about it. It didn't even occur to us that we wouldn't be really open about it. 9 minutes after the original report, we had a tweet out, and we were writing an email and things like this. So it turned out that the day after the hack was a day of record signups for us. So here we were talking about this huge failure that we'd had, and everybody was like, I feel like I can trust this company. I'm gonna see what they're all about. So that was a really cool experience. Content is another one. People often ask us, if you're a follower of the blog, people sometimes say, how do you come up with so much content, and how do you tell such interesting stories? And the truth is, we don't really try to tell an interesting story all that often. Every now and then we specifically look something up for the purpose of sharing it. But most of the time we just kind of tell what we're already doing. So if you're a startup, or you're an individual, or you're thinking about kind of how can I have a more compelling Twitter presence, or what stories can I write on my blog, you're already making these decisions anyway. You're already doing the research to find out what decision to make anyway. So just take a screenshot of it and share it. So that's another thing that comes, and it becomes a really compelling, interesting story. And then talent. So this has been a really amazing one for us as we've been hiring through the years, is when you put a lot out about your company and yourself, people tend to figure out what you're all about, and people who are interested in that kind of thing don't apply, and people who are kind of really all about that and have aligned values, they self-select into it. So, we always say that the salary thing, putting our salaries online, that really weeds out people who don't love transparency, right? People ain't nobody got time for that. So after we did that, we had record applications for the first time in our entire history, because people were like, okay, I know more about your company than I know about mine, and that makes me want to work for you. So if you're thinking about transparency as a business, these are 3 things that come out of that, 3 benefits. There's a lot more, but I feel like kind of a lot has been written about this, and so I don't want to harp too much on it, but if you have questions about this or anything else that's come out of sort of being transparent as a brand, please do send us a tweet or come talk to us afterwards. So transparency within a business is kind of what I want to share a little bit more about today. And the reason that this has sort of become so interesting to us is because it's had sort of a twofold effect, because at first we were transparent within the business because we have a value of defaulting to transparency. So first we released our salaries internally, for example. We released our equity chart, very similar to the salary one, internally first. We have transparent emails, things like this. And as well, the people who are working at Buffer have these same values. And when you're kind of surrounded by this environment, it's just, you learn that you're in an environment where transparency is rewarded, and you learn that the things that you were afraid of that might happen, they don't happen. So it's been really interesting to see, we have this value as a company, but it really has seeped into the individuals within the company and kind of how we operate on a day-to-day basis. So faster, better decisions internally. This is a really quick one, but we use Slack, for example. We have transparent email. We try and do the majority of our communication in public rooms in Slack, public channels. And the benefit of that is that communication is just so much faster, that decisions can be made faster, and ultimately better decisions are made. So really obvious recent example just from this week was the marketing team and the growth team were both thinking about launching experiments, and growth team was thinking about launching an experiment, marketing team was launching an email. You may have gotten it yesterday. And there didn't have to be like a meeting of the minds. Like there didn't have to be this like representative from growth and marketing who get together once a week and it's on the calendar. Like the growth team can just see what's going on in the marketing channel. They just know. Like they can just make that decision 3 days earlier than they would have been able to do. Rooting out bias is something that I could spend a whole talk on, but I won't. But this is really huge for us right now. We're transparent internally and externally, but you don't have to necessarily share your salaries with the public in order for this to count and to see this effect. So if you are transparent with your salaries, with your equity, with your promotions, with sometimes even feedback, that's a little bit of a tricky one. We've had some successes and some failures on that one. But if you are very, very transparent internally, it really heavily reduces the opportunity for implicit bias to creep into decisions. And this is something that, you think, well, as a startup, obviously, this is something that the industry is talking a lot about, inclusivity, and you don't necessarily think that it's happening that badly. It's kind of out there, but this is something that we're talking a lot about as a company, as an industry, and as a country. And when these things are transparent, you kind of have to make every decision and stand behind it. You have to be able to explain why you did this or that. And this is huge for rooting out any like implicit bias that might happen. And self-improvement. So we have 3 core values. One of them is, we have 10 values, but 3 of them are sort of our like central tenets. One of them is default to transparency, and the others have a focus on self-improvement. And this can mean kind of anything. Whatever it means to you, that's what it means. Different people have different definitions of self-improvement. Sometimes it's work-related, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's mental, emotional. And so we started doing this, which was transparency with self-improvement. And that's where you get into the really like human stuff. A company is what? Just a bunch of people, right? So we have found that by being really transparent with each other and honest with each other about things that we are excited about or struggling with, that this is kind of has this really magical effect. And that's really what I'm going to get into today. So have you heard this phrase, like, it's a muscle? People use that to describe creativity or writing or self-control or a whole bunch of things. And what people usually mean by this is that it takes practice, or that if you don't practice it or you don't use it, then you lose it. And that's true for transparency as well. And I recently was just learning a little bit about how muscles actually grow. And I don't know, there's people in here probably can explain this way better than I can, but from what I understand, when you stretch a muscle or when you push a muscle to its limit, it actually develops little tiny tears, and that's the way that the muscle grows, is through the healing of those tears. And I think that that causes little tiny bursts of pain that then end up causing you growth and strength, and then you can take on more. So this is really true for transparency as well. And so I really like this analogy. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes. So transparency within a company or within any group of humans translates in a really interesting way to empathy. And I want you to, if you'll indulge me here for a second, just think for a second about what your definition of empathy is. And I'm not going to call in volunteers. I'm not going to make you say it out loud. Just think about it for a second. This is mine. Empathy to me is personalized kindness within your sphere of knowledge, within your sphere of information, within your sphere of context, within your sphere of awareness. And what I mean by this is, in general, people who, there's a lot of similarities between people. So you can be kind to another person based on some basics, right? People want to be appreciated, they want to be loved. So you don't have to get too deep just to be kind. That's not what I'm saying. However, when you expand your knowledge about someone, what you have done is increased your own ability to personalize the kindness that you show to that person at a much more specific and deep level. And it goes the other way too. When you are open with somebody, whether it's someone in your family or someone in your community or someone at work, what you have done is you've given them the gift of more powerful and deeper empathy. And they are now able to show you a level of personalized kindness that they weren't able to do before. And this is what we found very much at our company at Buffer. So I'm going to give you an example. So here's something that 3 years ago I wouldn't have talked to coworkers about this. 1 year ago, I certainly wouldn't have stood up on a stage and talked to my 450 closest Louisville friends about it. But something that I recently shared with coworkers at our last retreat when we were all together last January was something that I never talked about before. And it was the fact that I have a lifelong battle with anxiety. And some of you may relate to this. And the way it manifests for me is known as an impulse control disorder. So that manifests as skin picking, hair pulling, nail biting, things like that. And if I hadn't told you that, or if you didn't live with me, or if I wasn't having a bad week, you would never know that. Maybe some of you wish we could go back to that time. But the thing is, people don't know that about me and didn't know that about me. And so, they weren't able to personalize kindness toward me about that very relevant thing in my life. Now, when I talk about that with coworkers, now people say to me, hey, how are you? And you kind of know what that means, right? Like when it's not like the, hey, how are you? It's like, how are you? Or, I have a friend who sometimes will say to me, you look great. And I know that when she says that, it doesn't mean that she likes my earrings or, that she likes my outfit. It means to her that I look healthy and that I look happy. And that is the greatest compliment in the world to me. And so that kind of thing has just really deepened my ability to communicate with my team, for them to understand what I'm going through, and for them to show me a level of kindness that they just wouldn't have been capable to do before. Now, it doesn't have to be quite that extreme, but wouldn't it be kind of beautiful if we expanded our knowledge about each other and deepened our empathy for each other as people, as a city, maybe as a country? Could use that a little right now, right? And this is kind of a joke slide, but have you heard of the no jerks rule? Sometimes it's a worse word. Some giggles, maybe you're familiar with it now. The idea here is, it's kind of like, obviously when you're working on transparency and you're trying to be your more authentic self and sharing more of yourself and inviting others to share more of themselves, you kind of have to have this rule of no mean people. So if you're gonna work on transparency in your life or in your company, this is kind of a good rule to implement at the same time. So lest you think I'm totally an oversharer and not at all representative of the Buffer ethos of transparency around self-improvement, I'm going to give you some examples. And the other reason I want to show you this is there's a huge range. It doesn't have to be the thing that you're working on and struggling with and the thing that's in your heart. It can be that you're trying to get better sleep at night. It's just whatever you're working on and thinking about and whatever you feel comfortable sharing at whatever level. So here's an example. For each book I read, I like to document my favorite passages. Right? Totally easy, totally simple. But now I know that this person's working on reading more, and I could say, hey, I saw this really cool thing. It turns out you can, go to your Kindle highlights, And you can see those, and Kindle has this cool thing where they will show you your highlights from one of your books every day. Have you checked that out or something? And that's a really fun conversation. And now I know that about this person working on reading. We can talk about that. Here's another. I've downloaded Stop, Breathe, Think, which Courtney recommended. I love it for building awareness and reflection into my daily meditation. Also, Italian lessons slipped last week. So here you can say, hey, friend, I'm so interested to learn more about meditation. Tell me more about your experience with meditation. Or, oh, this has been something that is really passion for me, so I can talk to you about it and I can share some of my experiences. Or, how's Italian going, and is there anything I can do to help you free up your lunch hour, or something like that. That's a it's a much more human exchange and a much more personalized exchange than like, how are you, right? Unless it's like, how are you? I'm now entering week 3 of my polyphasic sleep schedule. There are still some challenges ahead. Have you heard of polyphasic sleep? Yeah, a couple hands. Okay, so I'm not going to get into it, but basically it's when you spread out an 8-hour sleep schedule across 24 hours. So you sleep a little bit and then you get up, and then you sleep a little bit and then you get up. It's a really interesting experiment. Definitely check it out if this is the type of thing that you want to experiment with in your personal life. But knowing this about a coworker helps you kind of understand a little bit more if he's a little bit tired in a meeting, or when this happened, like a lot of us hadn't even heard of this, and so it expanded our worldview in a really cool way. Oh, and I should back up and say, the way we share transparently internally inside the company has changed throughout the years, depending on the size of the team and things like this, and just different experiments. Right now, we're in a phase where we pair people up, and so you are paired with somebody every week to talk about the thing that you're working on. What I'm pulling from here is from an earlier phase where we had an internal document where people could just write anything that they were thinking about or working on. I really loved that time because then you can really write anything and people can engage with it if they want to, and if not, and you see more people's self-improvements as opposed to just your pair call partner. So the reason there's quotes on this is because I'm pulling from an internal document. This month, I'm really grateful that I have paid my parents and the bank back in full for helping me with studies over the past few years, and I want to become more financially responsible moving forward. So this is a great one because we have this huge achievement, this celebration, this massive thing that this person should be so proud of, and we have this underlying anxiety that we hear, right? I'm really excited, I'm proud, and I'm a little nervous about moving forward because I'm working on this thing that doesn't come naturally to me. So on this level, you can say, hey, saw your announcement, huge congrats, really proud of you, really excited for you, now we can start the meeting. And that is so much richer than, have you seen any good movies lately? Not that there's anything wrong with that question, of course, but this is really personalized, this kindness. Or you can say, I understand what you're going through. I have had some anxieties around budgeting myself. We should hold each other accountable maybe. Or here's a book I read that really helped me when I was going through this and figuring out how to budget. Okay, ready? Okay, this is probably the most personal self-improvement I've put down here yet. One of the things I want to cut out completely is watching porn. Can we just have a quick round of applause for this very, very, very brave person who was so open and vulnerable and transparent as to share this? Thank you very much for participating in that. And what happened here was this set off a ripple effect inside the company of some people who maybe were interested to learn more about this. Now, it's a Tim Ferriss challenge. It's no booze as well. So there's a couple different facets to it. So a couple people said, I'm going to do this with you. This is the coolest thing. I'm so inspired. I never would have been able to talk about that or had someone else who I knew was participating in that sort of challenge. I'm going to do it with you. Or a couple people just said, This isn't a personal challenge of mine. However, I'm so amazed by the vulnerability and the transparency that you've inspired me to share a personal anxiety that I have, or I'm going to go home and talk to my spouse about that thing that I haven't been talking about, because I've realized that this is this really powerful tool. So, if you have one in your mind, definitely don't have to share it, but if you are so inspired and want to participate in the community, I think this is the hashtag we're using today, as well as CMLU. It doesn't have to be your deepest, darkest, quietest voice, although it can be. If you want to read more or be a better listener to your spouse or get better sleep, that's also a really great one. So if you'd like to share it, I would love to hear it. So one last thing I'll share. So there's a study. Have you heard the 36 questions to fall in love? Have you seen this? A couple head nods. So there was a study where they brought total strangers together and invited them to answer the same 36 questions. Both people answered it. And the idea was it very quickly progressed into kind of a very personal area. And they brought strangers together and thought, I wonder if we can make two people fall in love, just from total strangers, from participating in this couple hours of questions and then looking into each other's eyes. Now, you should definitely look that up. It's a really interesting study. I'm going to spoil it for you, sorry. But the answer is you can. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that you do that, but this shows that you literally increase your capacity to show and feel and absorb love when you open yourself up. And that's kind of an amazing thing, right? Wouldn't that be cool if we could do that a little bit more with the people who we see every day, or the person who is a little bit shy who we hadn't talked to before, or someone in our family maybe. So I love that story. So how do you sort of put it into action? We get this question a lot because people say well, my company isn't really transparent, or my industry isn't really transparent, or my friends aren't really like this, and I totally get it. You can talk about it at a company level, or what if you're a freelancer, what if you don't have a 9-to-5, things like this. You can sort of set out on this, I'm going to be transparent now, I'm going to change everything, and I'm going to set this down as one of my core values, and I'm going to tweet every day, and so you can do that, and we love that, and that's what we did. But you don't have to do that. You can just be a little bit more open, ask a slightly tougher question, talk to somebody at a slightly deeper level than you did before. And that can be someone who you work with, it can be your spouse, it can even look like just being a little bit more authentic on social media, talking about something a little bit harder, maybe taking the filter off that photo. So a couple of examples, if you are looking for a question to ask, there's so many examples online. I encourage you to Google it. What can I ask instead of how are you? Or at a cocktail party, what can you ask instead of what do you do? There's a ton of these examples. I'm just going to burn through a couple of them in case you want to borrow one of them today. What's the best thing that happened to you today? What are you most excited about right now? If money were no object, what would you do with your life? What's something you're really into right now? What's the most interesting thing that's happened to you lately? What are you looking forward to? What's your favorite thing to spend money on? What habit or improvement are you working on? What cheers you up? I like that one. For what in your life do you feel the most grateful? That's a really great one too. What's on your mind lately? What's the most interesting thing you've learned recently? What problem do you wish you could solve? What personal habit are you proudest of? If you could do any part of today over again, what would it be? You're like, it's 9 a.m., I would have slept in. How can I make your day easier in 5 minutes? When did you feel appreciated today? And of course, do you think Adnan did it? So, this is a journey. Do you like my map emoji? That's supposed to represent a journey. When we were talking about this topic, one of my dear friends and coworkers said, we really, as people, just want to know and be known. That's what it comes down to. we want other things. We want to be comfortable. We want to, be fulfilled at work and stuff. But as humans, we want to know and be known. And this can look like anything for you. It does not have to start at the company level, although it can. This is what we did. This is a very specific way of doing it. It doesn't have to look like this for you, but if it does mean, being slightly more honest with somebody in your life, or, posting that thing to Facebook that you really want some thoughts on, but you haven't shared before. So please get in touch on this topic if this is something that resonated with you. If you feel like, I have so many questions, how does this work? Or, this is kind of crazy, I want to argue it. Or, I tried one of your questions and, it worked. I really would love to hear absolutely any stories that you have. So please do get in touch on Twitter anytime. And we're at Buffer, and a couple of us are here. We're going to be in the back as well afterwards. So thank you so much. Y'all are really fun.